Hi, this is Jordan Ramirez. Today's Minisode is an underrated psychological hyper-realistic drama from Peter Weir, Fearless from 1993, starring Jeff Bridges, Isabella Rossellini, Rosie Perez, John Turturro, Tom Hulce, and Benicio del Toro. It's an amazing film that I hope you enjoy listening to. So, without further ado, you are listening to a Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez Minisode. The film I am recommending for this minisode is the drama film Fearless, released in 1993, directed by Peter Weir, starring Jeff Bridges, Isabella Rossellini, Rosie Perez, John Turturro, Tom Hulce, and Benicio del Toro. After surviving a plane crash, Max Klein, played by Jeff Bridges, now becomes a completely different man. He no longer fears death or dying and decides to confront his fears head-on. Once Max arrives back home to his wife, Laura, played by Isabella Rossellini, and his son, he is no longer grounded in reality, but instead he becomes detached from it. So, he starts seeing another survivor of the plane crash, Carla Rodrigo, played by Rosie Perez, and together they form a special bond as plane crash survivors. It is, in my opinion, one of the best underrated films, with these great performances from Jeff Bridges, Rosie Perez, Isabella Rossellini, John Turturro, Tom Hulce, and Benicio del Toro that I have seen that I feel does not get a lot of attention. The realism in their performance, courtesy of Peter Weir, is amazing to watch that doesn't feel cliched or overacted. Bridges as the lead character whose life perception has changed after the crash is, to me, one of the best performances of the film, as well as the psychological trauma that Rosie Perez's character Carla goes through. But it is done with believability and emotional persuasion that makes her performance stand out in the film as well. The film also has an evocative feel of handling the subject matter very delicately without going too overboard when dealing with confrontation of death and psychological trauma from the two main leading characters. The characters in the film are seen more as three-dimensional and complicated, since they are not one-dimensional cookie-cutter characters often found in other dramas similar to this. Rafael Iglesias' writing, combined with the direction of Peter Weir, is a positive for this film in the themes of life and death, theology, psychological trauma, detachment from reality, guilt, and so on and so forth, which makes this film stand out for me. One of the main motifs that I will mention as I was watching this film from beginning to end was the use of a bright circular object. At first, I had no idea of what was the significance of it in the story, but as the film progresses, near the end of the film, it turns out that it is taken directly from Bosch's painting known as The Ascent of the Blessed, which depicts the angels helping the human souls ascending towards heaven in a bright circular tunnel of light. That is one of the many aesthetic elements seen in this film. It is not only a psychological and existential film, but also a theological film with the usage of Christian iconography that is displayed in this feature. The basis for the film began when novelist Rafael Iglesias took a personal experience from a car accident in which his car flipped over and he was uninjured from the accident. After that, his mindset was completely altered. In 1988, Iglesias was researching newspaper reports about survivors of a plane crash who had a near experience with death and managed to survive. He had an obsession in plane crashes due to his own fear of flying. And always, I would imagine what the passengers and crew must have been feeling between the time they realized the flight was in trouble and the moment the aircraft actually hit the ground. The next year, in 1989, Iglesias read a news report in the papers about a plane crash in an Iowa cornfield that was United Airlines Flight 232. At that moment, he came across a single sentence about two of the survivors from that crash and the circumstances surrounding that event. The two survivors ended up being the inspiration for his leading characters in his novel, imagining what their lives must have been like before and after the crash. His seventh novel would be entitled Fearless. It was published that same year. Iglesias felt that his vision from the book could be well adapted as a feature film, so he immediately contacted movie producers to sell the idea. Iglesias at the time was broke, and the producers were not interested. The producers claimed that studio executives would think that the novel would not be suitably adapted as a feature film. Iglesias, however, did not back down, so he wrote a spec screenplay from his own novel in 6 weeks. In 1991, Iglesias submitted the script to his friends whom he knew for over 20 years, producers Paula Weinstein and Mark Rosenberg, who made the decision to option the script and taking it to Warner Brothers. Once the project was moving at lightning speed with a powerful story in their hands, the producing duo decided for their choice of director that they wanted Peter Weir. Weir, at that time, had just completed his film Green Card and took a year off. When he came back to work, he was meeting with writers and studio heads as part of his condition. I wanted to go to the people who paid for scripts and the people who wrote them. Mark Rosenberg, whom I had met years before when he was an executive at Warner Brothers, was the only producer who got through my only a writer or studio head decree. Weir was looking for scripts that were difficult or outside of his comfort zone that would work to his advantage. Rosenberg gave him this script. After Weir finished reading it, he stated that the writing was good and felt that the script was, in fact, 2 movies. Weir couldn't see how the script could end up as a movie, but then he decided that he wanted to play around with the story. I was just driving around listening to music, and I realized I could do anything I liked, as long as the story remained about life and death, or rather love and fear, which was more to the point. You can't say anything about death because you don't know about death. You could certainly talk about fear. I used parts of the crash as flashbacks to show what the characters were still working out, the way one does after any kind of trauma. Weir was not only changing the story by breaking the plane crash into flashbacks that makes human beings tick, but also using close-ups to capture the essence of the human soul. When I started this film, it occurred to me how interesting it would be to attempt to photograph souls, and I thought, why did that phrase photograph souls come to mind? Where have I seen souls photographed? You know, with the barrier between the subject and the camera removed, well, with children under a certain age, but that age gets younger and younger. Tribal people, the first time they're photographed, you can see the faces where there is no projection of what they would like you to see. In the world we live in, everybody tries to project image. For the cinematography of the film, Peter Weir chose Alan DeVue, who previously worked with Steven Spielberg, John Schlesinger, and George Miller. DeVue was brought on board as Weir wanted to discuss the script with DeVue. He asked no questions about it whatsoever. They both discussed the script in 1992 and agreed that image clarity was important, not just in the sharpness of the image, but the technique necessary to make the audience look at the exact spot that they want them to see. DeVue recalled that for this film, quote, "We often came in a lot tighter than you normally see on close-ups, often using Jeff's eyes to pull the audience into scenes," end quote. The original male lead for the film was originally going to be played by Mel Gibson, whom Weir previously worked with. Gibson was unavailable since he was making his directorial debut with The Man Without a Face, so Jeff Bridges was cast instead. Bridges needed a break and was at first skeptical of playing this role. However, Weir's first piece of direction to Bridges was to relax and reload without thinking too much about the movie in mind. After 6 weeks, Weir started to send Bridges the material that would help out in the process. Bridges was excited about working on this project since he was now working with a collaborative and inclusive director who was not difficult to work with and embraced using actors' ideas into his work. Jeff Bridges also got to meet the author/screenwriter of the film, Rafael Iglesias, and discussed about his character for the film. Iglesias gave Bridges his blessing to play this character after their conversation together. The film made a few changes from the original novel by Rafael Iglesias. 1. The story originally took place in New York City. Weir did not want to film in New York because he already filmed his previous movie, Green Card, in New York, so the setting was changed to San Francisco to make it easier for Weir. 2. The other characters in the story were Italian who lived in Little Italy. It was now changed to Latinos living in the Mission District, which was one of the reasons why Rosie Perez was cast in the film as the other lead character, since the role was a Cinderella slipper that felt so complex and real. Third, the novel opens with a plane crash and the aftermath. For the film, Weir made the conscious decision of having the film start with the aftermath of the crash, and then through a series of flashbacks up until the very end of the film do we see the plane crash. The film had a limited release on October 15, 1993. It later had a world premiere on November 5th of that year. The film was well received amongst critics and were positive. Unfortunately, the film was a box office flop and was not a big success that it was going to be. However, Bridges' performance did receive positive reception, as well as Rosie Perez, who earned an Oscar nomination for her performance in the film as Carla for Best Actress in a Supporting Role. The film was rediscovered in the years following its release and was included in the collage feature film The Green Fog from 2017. As the film is now 30 years old, I can say that this is one of the best overlooked gems that I think still deserves recognition in terms of its story, courtesy of Rafael Iglesias, direction from Peter Weir, the performances, the cinematography by Alan DeVue, and the score by Maurice Jarre that is worth watching. On the next episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, it's the Academy Award-winning masterpiece Everything Everywhere All at Once from 2022, directed by the Daniels, starring Michelle Yeoh, Jenny Slate, Ke-Huy Quan, and Jamie Lee Curtis, airing this Friday at 4 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Radio Public. This has been a Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez minisode. Tune into the minisodes every Monday at 12 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Radio Public. If you want to be a guest on my special interactive video podcast, make sure to send your recommendation on the Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez Facebook page or send your audition video on YouTube or Instagram Shorts. The video podcast will be on Spotify. If you are on Spotify, make sure to like and subscribe to keep this show going, and make sure to recommend your friends and family members to tune into this podcast. I also have my own YouTube channel, Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, where you can watch my latest video podcast and make sure to like and subscribe. And until then, I'll see you at the movies.